Hey guys, tonight we are heading north. The fjord is frozen and the snow is burying the coast, but we have work to do. We are stepping into the Viking boat shed. We are going to build the dragon that will sail the seas. This is a story about oak, iron, and the smell of hot tar. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Now, listen to the wind howl outside, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The massive A-frame structure rises from the rocky ground like the ribcage of something ancient and buried. The boat shed. You can feel it before you even step inside. The weight of it, the solidity, the way it seems to have grown out of the landscape rather than been built upon it. Heavy timber beams, each one wider than a man's torso, angle upward and meet at a point that disappears into shadow. The roof is thatch and timber, and it sags slightly in the middle from years of snow and rain pressing down, always pushing down the way the north pushes against everything. Outside, the blizzard is relentless. You can hear it even here, inside, muffled but present, a constant hissing against the timber walls. The wind finds its way through cracks, through gaps in the boards, and it carries with it the cold of the open water and the deeper cold of the mountains. The fjord beyond is invisible now, buried beneath white, but you can feel it too, the presence of that deep water, that place where the ship will eventually go, still and patient and waiting. You step through the entrance, and the smell hits you all at once. It is not a single smell, but a layering of them, each one settling into your lungs, into your clothes, into your very thoughts. There is the raw smell of freshly cut oak, that deep and woody scent that speaks of forests and rings and centuries contained in grain. Beneath that is the sharper smell of pine tar, that black substance that will eventually seal every plank and joint, that will make the ship waterproof and strong, that has been heating in a small fire pit in the corner and fills the air with something between incense and warning. And underneath everything, mixed through it all like a thread, is the smell of wet wool, the cloaks and tunics and wrappings of the men who work here, who come in from the cold and bring the moisture of the fjord into the shelter. The light is low. Thin windows have been cut into the massive timber walls, but the blizzard has turned the world outside into a blank whiteness that throws almost no useful light into the space. Instead, the builders rely on the fire pit and on oil lamps hung from chains. The lamps throw dancing shadows across everything, so the boat shed becomes a place of movement and stillness at once. In one moment, something is clear and visible. In the next moment, it has sunk back into shadow, into the realm of suggestion and shape. And there, in the center of all this, looming like something alive but frozen, is the ship. It is not yet a ship, not really. Not in the way you think of ships. There is no hull, no stern, no bow that cuts the water. There is only the skeleton, and it is enormous. The frame rises perhaps 30 feet from the ground, the A-shape of it mirrored in the structure of the shed itself, as if the shed was built around the ship rather than the ship being built inside the shed. In the shadows and the flickering light, it looks like the ribcage of some great creature, a whale, perhaps, or some legendary beast that once swam in these waters and beached itself here to die. The bones of it are clean and pale, stripped of bark, shaped with purpose but not yet refined. They rise upward and then angle inward, creating a cavity, a hollow place waiting to be filled with planks and purpose. The smell of fresh shavings and sawdust coats everything. It clings to your clothes and fills your mouth when you breathe. The floor is covered with wood chips, with scraps, with evidence of days and weeks of work. A single mistake here could cost days of work elsewhere, and so the builders move with a kind of focused awareness, a meditation on precision and purpose. You walk deeper into the shed, and the presence of the ship grows heavier. The wood creaks slightly, even though nothing has moved, as if the timber is settling, communicating with itself, remembering the forests it came from. The builders have paused in their work. It is late in the day, close to dark, and they have left their tools arranged carefully on wooden benches. An axe leans against one beam, its blade catching the firelight. Wooden mallets are stacked in a corner. Wedges of iron and wood are arranged like prayer candles. The temperature inside the shed is colder than outside, or perhaps it just feels that way. The massive timber walls have insulated against the blizzard, creating a pocket of relative calm, but the cold has seeped in anyway, has made its way through the cracks, and settled into the air like something with weight and intention. Your breath becomes visible. You can watch it rise and dissipate in the firelight. Time moves differently here. It moves like the growth of trees, like the slow accumulation of rings in oak, like the patient work of men who understand that a ship takes months to build and that rushing the work is a way of inviting disaster. The ship in front of you represents not days of work, but perhaps 5 or 6 months already, and it will take another month, maybe two, before the frame is ready for planking. And then the real work begins. The joining, the sealing, the slow assembly of all the pieces that will make this ship watertight and strong. But for now, in this moment, the focus is on the backbone, the keel. It lies on wooden supports that run the length of the shed, and it is the most massive piece of wood you have ever seen. It is a single piece of oak, split lengthwise from an enormous tree, and it runs nearly 80 feet from one end of the shed to the other. The width of it is perhaps 2 feet, the depth may be 18 inches, and it carries all the weight that the ship will ever carry. It is, in the most literal sense, the foundation upon which everything else rests. You walk over to the keel and lay your hand on it. The wood is cold. Not the cold of the blizzard outside, not the cold of the fjord, but the cold that lives inside oak, that comes from the density of it, from years of growth and compression. The grain is visible, running in long striations like the map of a long journey. It feels smooth, worn smooth by the palms of many hands in recent weeks. The men who built this shed, who felled the tree that became this keel, who split it and shaped it and positioned it here, all of them have touched this wood. All of their attention, their knowledge, their years of experience are contained in this single piece. Running your fingers along it, you can feel the slight warping from where the wood is still settling, still adjusting to being inside the shed, still remembering being part of a standing tree. The thought of that tree rises in your mind, a massive oak, perhaps 200 or 300 years old, standing in a forest somewhere to the north or east, its roots deep in the earth, its branches reaching toward the sky. And then it was felled. A saw or an axe, perhaps over the course of a full day of work, finally brought it down. And then it was processed, split, shaped, and transported here to the coast, to this shed, where it would become the spine of a ship that would carry men across the sea to places those men could not yet imagine. The Vikings understood something fundamental about oak that you can understand now, standing in this shed, your hand on this cold wood. They understood that oak, once it is seasoned, is nearly indestructible. It resists rot. It flexes slightly under pressure without breaking. It can hold the shape you give it for centuries. An oak ship built today, if it is maintained, if it is kept dry and treated with tar and care, might still be seaworthy in 200 years. The Vikings were not thinking of their own lifetimes when they chose their materials. They were thinking of generations. They were thinking of legacy and of weight. The keel is the reason the ship will not sink. Every other piece of the ship will do important work. The ribs will give it shape, the planks will seal it, the fastenings will hold it together. But the keel is the promise. The keel is the guarantee. The keel says, you will float. You will not go down into the dark. The weight of the keel, paradoxically, is what will keep the ship from sinking. The weight of it will lower the center of gravity and create stability in the water. The shape of it will cut through the water and prevent the hull from rolling. Everything else flows from this single massive piece of oak. You take your hand away from the keel and stand back, looking at the ship in its skeleton state, understanding now that what you are looking at is not incomplete, but rather in its truest form. This is the essence of the ship. The planks will come later, the details will come later, But the fundamental truth of the ship is here in this framework of wood and careful geometry. The fire pit crackles. A log shifts and sends sparks drifting upward into the shadows. The blizzard continues outside, relentless and white. But inside the shed, there is a different kind of silence, a working silence, a silence full of purpose and waiting. And it is in this silence, in the pauses between the work, that you can hear it. The axe. Not now, not in this moment, but in the next part of the day, when the builders return and the work resumes, the axe will be the heartbeat of the boat shed. The axe is not the tool you might imagine. It is not a tool for cutting, not in the way a saw is a cutting tool. The axe is a splitting tool. The Vikings understood a subtle but crucial distinction. A saw cuts through the fibers of wood, weakening them, creating sawdust and waste. An axe, wielded correctly, splits the wood along its natural grain, following the fibers rather than cutting against them. The resulting planks are stronger, more flexible, more likely to last for centuries rather than merely decades. The head of the axe leans against the timber, waiting. It is a massive thing, iron-heavy, with a blade that is keen and sharp, and has been maintained carefully. The handle is oak, naturally, turned smooth and dark from use, worn by hands working in cold and wet conditions. The balance of it is perfect, not top-heavy like some tools, but distributed in a way that makes the work of swinging it again and again something that can be sustained for hours without the arms burning out completely. Imagine the work. Imagine a massive log of oak, perhaps a foot in diameter and 20 feet long, lying on supports in the shed. The builder stands over it, feet shoulder-width apart, the axe in both hands. He raises it above his head, and there is a moment of stillness, of gathering, of breathing. Then he brings it down. The sound is a pure, clean thwack. It is a sound with weight and finality. The axe bites into the wood at a slight angle, not straight down but angled across the grain, and the impact sends vibrations through the log and through the ground. For a moment, nothing happens. The wood seems to absorb the blow, to consider it. And then, in a sudden moment of release, the wood splits. It cracks open along the grain, following the natural weakness in the fiber, and a piece separates from the log. Not a plank yet. The wood is rough and irregular, thick in some places, thinner in others. The builder sets the axe aside momentarily and examines the piece. He runs his hands along it, feeling for warping, for weakness, for the places where the wood split in an unintended direction. There are always places like this. No split is perfectly straight. No piece of wood gives up its shape without resistance. But this piece is good. This piece will become a plank. He returns to the log and positions the axe again. Another raise. Another moment of gathering. Another thwack, and the wood splits again. The sound echoes in the shed, bouncing off the massive beams and the roof and the walls. It is a sound that must have been the soundtrack to shipbuilding throughout the Viking world, in sheds on fjords and bays and river valleys, a rhythm as old as woodworking itself. Thwack, thwack, thwack. The sound has a hypnotic quality. There is a rhythm to it, a measured pace that is neither rushed nor slow. It is the pace of sustainable work, of labor that can be maintained for hours without exhaustion. The sound becomes meditative for the builder. His mind empties of everything except the present moment, the weight of the axe, the resistance of the wood, the timing of the swing, the satisfaction of the split. By the end of the day, a single log might yield a dozen planks. These planks will be stacked carefully on supports, propped in a way that allows air to flow around them, to help them dry evenly. They will sit here for weeks sometimes, drying slowly, adjusting to the temperature and humidity of the shed. And during that waiting time, the builder will work on other logs, other pieces, gradually assembling the raw materials from which the ship will be built. But the satisfaction of the splitting never lessens. Each time, it is a small miracle. The way the wood yields, the way it follows its own nature, the way a massive log becomes many smaller pieces. each one containing potential, each one a step closer to the finished ship. The work of the axe is fundamental because it teaches a philosophy. It teaches that you work with the wood, not against it. You understand its nature, the direction of the grain, the density of the fiber, the weak places where it wants to split, and you work with these things rather than fighting them. You use the wood's own desire to separate along its grain. You make the wood do the work, rather than forcing the work through the wood. This is a lesson that extends beyond shipbuilding. This is a lesson about life, about working with natural forces rather than against them, about understanding the grain of things and moving with it rather than against it. The massive frame of the ship is built from pieces that were split, not sawed. The ribs, in particular, come from specially selected trees. The builders did not cut trees randomly and hope they would work. Instead, they went to the forest with a specific vision in mind. They were looking for trees with natural curves. A tree that grows on a hillside, pushing against the slope, develops a curve in its trunk. A tree that grew in competition with other trees for light will twist and curve as it reaches upward. These curves are valuable. They are stronger than the artificial curves that would result from bending straight wood, and they are used throughout the ship. A tree that has grown with a curve matching the angle needed for a ship's rib is not felled and processed like a normal log. Instead, it is felled and then carefully sectioned to preserve that curve. A section of the curved trunk becomes a rib. The wood is split to its final rough dimensions, and then it is carried carefully to the shed, where it is fitted against the keel. Imagine this. The skeleton of the ship is taking shape now. The keel lies in the center, that massive oak spine, and rising from it, attached to carefully prepared joints, are the ribs. 50 of them, maybe more, each one taking the shape of the ship, creating the curve from the deep keel up and out, and then down again on the other side. Each rib is not a straight line, but a curve, following the shape of the ship that exists in the builders' minds, in their experience, in the geometric knowledge they have accumulated through building ships over many years. The ribs lean inward toward each other as they rise. The space between them is wide at the keel and narrower as you move upward, creating the sense that the ship is pointed, that it has an intention, that it wants to move through the water. The ribs are the skeleton, and from them will eventually hang the planks, the skin of the ship. But before the planks, there is more preparation. The ribs are not yet secured. They are held in place by temporary wooden braces, by the careful arrangement of supports, by the knowledge of the builders that if they release the structure too soon, it will shift and warp and never take the shape intended. The work is slow and patient. There is no rushing. The frame of the ship is given time to settle into its shape, to accept the weight that will eventually be placed upon it. Standing in the shed, looking at this skeletal form, you can see the ship now. You can see how the ribs, when viewed from the side, create a profile that is both graceful and strong. The curve is not symmetrical. One side is slightly different from the other, designed to account for the way the ship will be launched, the forces that will act upon it in the water. The builders knew these things not from mathematics written on paper, but from experience, from building ship after ship, from understanding through their bodies and their hands what works and what fails. The skeleton rises in the shadows of the shed, being made real, being drawn out of the forest and given new purpose. The ribs are no longer parts of trees, but parts of a ship. The wood has been claimed, has been shaped, has begun its transformation. And this is only the beginning. The next phase of the work is perhaps the most critical and the most delicate. The planks must be created, and the creation of the planks is an art form, a skill, a meditation. The process is called riving. It is the slow, careful splitting of a log into planks, one by one, using only wedges, mallets, and an understanding of wood that borders on supernatural. There is no technology here, no saw, no modern tool. There is only wood, iron, and the knowledge of how to work with both. A log is positioned on wooden horses, supports that hold it steady and secure. The builder examines it carefully, looking for the best place to begin the first split. He is not simply looking at the wood visually. He is thinking about the grain, about the direction of the growth rings, about the weaknesses and strengths that he cannot see, but can somehow sense through years of experience. He places his hands on the wood and feels it. He understands its nature. When he has made his decision, he takes an iron wedge, a tapered piece of metal, thicker on one end and coming to a thin edge on the other, and he places it against the end of the log, aligned with the grain, positioned in a way that will encourage the wood to split in the right direction. Beside him stands another worker, holding a wooden mallet. The mallet head is perhaps 4 inches across, solid wood, worn smooth from use. The builder taps the wedge. Tap, tap, tap. It is a light blow, not a force but a suggestion. The wedge bites slightly into the wood, sinking perhaps a 1/4 inch into the end grain. The builder pulls the wedge out and repositions it a few inches further along the end of the log. He taps it again, and then again, and again. This is a skill that takes years to master. The force of the blow must be exactly right, enough to move the wedge, but not so much that it drives the wedge too far and causes the wood to split prematurely in the wrong direction. The spacing of the wedges must be precise. Too far apart, and the wood will not split cleanly. Too close, and the wood will be damaged. And the positioning must account for the grain, which is not always perfectly straight, but often has variations and subtle curves that must be worked with, not against. Gradually, over the course of 5, 10, sometimes 20 minutes of careful tapping, a crack appears in the end of the log. It is barely visible at first, just a thin line running along the grain. But it is there. The wood has begun to fail, to surrender to the logic of its own grain. The wedges are worked further and further into the log, following this crack, widening it, driving deeper and deeper. And then, in a sudden moment of release, the wood gives way. It is not a violent separation. It is not the crashing surrender of wood that has been forced. It is instead a controlled opening, a willing separation, as if the wood finally accepts what is happening and allows the split to complete itself. The log opens like a flower, like a book, like an embrace being released. The two halves separate with a sound like a deep sigh, and the surface that is revealed is raw and pale and beautiful in its directness. The smell of the wood rises into the air. The scent of deep oak, long contained within the log, suddenly free. But more than that, the scent of sap, the vital fluid that once ran through the tree, that once moved nutrients from root to leaf in the slow business of growth. The sap that has been sealed inside the wood is suddenly exposed, released, oxidizing slightly in the air. It is a smell of life and growth and ancient forests, and it fills the shed with a presence that feels almost sacred. The builder runs his hands along the newly split surface. It is warm, warmer than the outside of the log, warmer than the surrounding air. The wood has been protected, sealed, and now it is exposed, and it carries the warmth of that protection. He examines it for quality, for straightness, for any sign that the split did not follow the grain exactly as intended. In the best cases, the two halves separate cleanly, with no tears or irregularities, revealing a surface so smooth that it feels almost polished. But the work is not complete. The split is usually not exact enough to create a usable plank directly. There are thin edges that need to be refined, irregularities that need to be smoothed. More wedges are driven into the wood at different points, creating secondary splits that refine the shape. A plank that was once the inside of a log becomes visible, becomes real, becomes something that can be used. One log of perhaps a foot in diameter and maybe 20 feet long can be split into 5, 6, sometimes 8 planks, depending on the size of the log and the skill of the builder. Some logs are larger and yield more planks. Some are smaller or have imperfections and yield fewer. But the result is always the same. A collection of planks, each one raw and rough still, but each one containing the potential of the finished ship. These planks are carried into the shed and positioned carefully on supports. They are arranged so that air can flow around them, so that they can dry evenly. The drying is not rushed. Wet wood is weak wood, prone to warping and splitting in unintended ways. The planks are given time, weeks sometimes, to dry slowly, to adjust to the temperature and humidity of the shed, to shrink slightly as the water content evaporates. This slow drying is part of the craft. It is part of the patience that shipbuilding requires. During this time, while the planks are drying, the work continues on the frame. More ribs are fitted. The structure is braced and supported. The shape of the ship is refined and perfected. The builders are thinking ahead, imagining the moment when the planks will be ready and the actual hull construction can begin. But eventually that moment arrives. The planks are dry. They are ready. And the most visible and complex phase of the work can finally begin. The planks are laid on the hull in a process called clinker building or overlapping plank construction. Unlike some shipbuilding traditions where the planks are joined edge to edge, the Viking method overlaps them, each plank sitting slightly above the one below it, creating a series of ridges running along the outside of the hull. It is a technique that serves both structural and practical purposes. The overlapping creates incredible flexibility. When a plank on one side of the ship is under stress from the force of the waves, the flexibility of the overlap allows it to move slightly relative to the planks around it. The ship does not resist the ocean's forces so much as it yields to them, flexing and moving with the water rather than fighting against it. This flexibility is part of the reason Viking ships are so seaworthy. They are not rigid structures, but organic ones, alive in the water, responding to every movement of the sea. The overlapping also provides a practical advantage. The upper plank of each overlap naturally sheds water, the way roof shingles work. Water running down the side of the hull will flow along the upper plank and then drip off at the overlap, rather than seeking out the seams between planks and finding cracks and gaps. The overlap is both elegant and functional, a design that solves problems and does so in a way that looks right, that feels right, that becomes beautiful through its pure functionality. The process of laying the planks is meticulous. Each plank must be positioned exactly, its overlap must be precise, and it must be fastened to the ribs with iron rivets. But before any of that can happen, the plank must be shaped to follow the curve of the hull. This is perhaps the most subtle skill in shipbuilding. The hull is not straight anywhere. Every section of it has curves, subtle curves that follow the mathematics of the ship's design. A plank that is straight will not fit properly. A plank that is poorly curved will have gaps and will not fasten correctly. Some planks can be bent into shape when they are heated or steamed. But the best approach is to shape the plank to begin with, to rough shape it during the creation phase, so that when it is brought to the shed and prepared for fastening, it is already close to the final shape needed. This requires an understanding of three-dimensional geometry that is not learned from books, but from experience, from looking at the hull and understanding how each plank must curve to follow it properly. The planks are sorted. The widest ones will form the lowest planks near the keel, where the stresses are greatest, and the plank must be substantial. The narrower planks will form the higher planks, nearer to the gunwales. The grain of each plank is examined, the straightness is assessed, the quality is judged. Some planks are rejected because they have defects, because they twisted during drying, because they simply are not quite right. These rejected planks will be used for other purposes, supports, braces, later repairs. Nothing is wasted in the boat shed. When a plank is selected for a particular position on the hull, the builder brings it to that position and positions it carefully, matching its overlap to the plank below, setting it into place. At this point, the plank is not fastened. It is simply resting in position, held in place by temporary wooden pegs or by the weight of gravity, by the arrangement of the frame and the ribs beneath it. The builder examines the plank in this position from multiple angles. He is looking for any gap, any misalignment, any place where the plank does not follow the hull correctly. If there is a gap between the overlap and the plank below, the plank must be adjusted. This might mean shimming it in position, or it might mean that the plank itself needs to be removed and further shaped. The goal is a perfect, tight overlap with no gaps anywhere. This is meticulous work. It can take an hour to position a single plank correctly. But the time is necessary because if the planks are not laid correctly, if there are gaps or misalignments, the ship will leak. And a leaking ship is a drowning ship. The integrity of the hull is the difference between life and death. There is no room for error. When the plank is finally positioned correctly, when there is no gap along the entire length of the overlap, when the alignment is perfect from one end of the ship to the other, then comes the fastening. This is where the auger comes into play. The auger is a tool for drilling holes, and the spoon-bit auger that the Vikings used is a specialized thing. The bit itself is shaped like a small spoon, with a raised center point and raised edges, so that when it is rotated, it chips away the wood in a very controlled manner. The auger is attached to a wooden shaft that can be quite long, sometimes 4 or 5 feet, giving the operator leverage and the ability to apply steady pressure while rotating. The process of hand drilling holes for rivets is called boring, and it is another of the hypnotic, meditative tasks that fills the shipbuilding process. The builder positions the auger at the first point where a rivet will be fastened, aligning the spoon bit with a mark that has been made on the plank. He grips the shaft of the auger with both hands, pressing down with his body weight while he begins to rotate the handle. The rotation must be steady and controlled. If he rotates too fast, the auger will wander offline, and the hole will be drilled at an angle, which will weaken the fastening. If he presses too hard, the auger can break or the wood can split. The skill is in finding the right balance of pressure and rotation, in maintaining that balance for the entire depth of the hole, in feeling the resistance of the wood through his hands, and adjusting his technique accordingly. As the auger penetrates the plank, the sound changes. At first, when the spoon bit is just biting into the surface, the sound is a clean scritch. It is the sound of the steel edge cutting into the wood, of the fibers separating, of the transformation of solid oak into a whole. The sound is clean and clear, a single high-pitched note. But as the auger goes deeper, as more and more of the bit is engaged with the wood, the sound shifts. It becomes a scratching, a scritch-scratch, a rhythm of engagement and release, as the auger creates the whole bit by bit, chip by chip. The smell changes too. At the surface, the wood chips are large and relatively fresh. But as the hole deepens, the auger reaches wood that has been sealed inside the log for decades or centuries. And as this deep wood is drilled through, it releases its smell, that deep oak scent, that suggestion of ancient growth and deep time. The hole must be drilled not just through the plank, but also partway through the rib beneath it, so that the rivet will have something to grip, something to fasten into. The depth is important and is usually marked on the auger shaft with a notch or a mark. The builder drills until the mark aligns with the surface of the plank, and then he stops. The hole is complete. He withdraws the auger, and the hole remains. A small portal, a cylinder of emptiness in the solid wood, a place where a rivet will soon be driven, creating a permanent bond between the plank and the rib, between the skin and the skeleton of the ship. The scritch-scratch of the auger continues. There are dozens of holes along the overlap of each plank. For a ship with perhaps 50 planks, with several hundred holes total, the drilling is a task that takes many days. The sound becomes the sound of the boat shed. It becomes the rhythm of the work. It becomes something that, after a while, stops being something you hear consciously and becomes instead the baseline of existence, the background music of creation. And as the holes are drilled, as the auger makes its sound and creates its emptiness in the wood, the ship is gradually fastened together. Each hole is a promise of connection, a commitment to unity, a small declaration that these pieces of wood will hold together, will become a single thing, will float as one. The work is slow and deliberate and patient. The ship is not being built. It is being assembled, which is different. It is being assembled from pieces that were selected and shaped over weeks and months, pieces that have been dried and tested and proven sound. The assembly is the final step, the moment when all of that prior work, all of that preparation, all of that understanding of wood and grain and the nature of oak finally comes together. The smoke from the tar pit drifts through the shed. The fire crackles in its place. The wind continues to howl outside, and the snow continues to fall, burying the coast, freezing the fjord. But inside, in the light of the fire and the oil lamps, the ship slowly takes on its form, plank by plank, hole by hole, rivet by rivet, becoming real, becoming solid, becoming ready for the sea. The holes are drilled, hundreds of them, running in lines along the overlaps of the planks, each one a small emptiness waiting to be filled, waiting to be transformed into something permanent and strong. The planks lie in their positions on the hull, held in place by the careful arrangement of the frame, by the understanding that these pieces are now part of a single structure, even though they are not yet permanently joined. And now comes the moment where the ship truly becomes one, the rivet. An iron rivet is a simple thing, a nail really, but a nail that is larger and more carefully crafted than what you might use to hang a thing on a wall. The head of the rivet is slightly domed, and the shaft is round and smooth and perfectly straight. These rivets have been made by the smith, forged in his fire, shaped on his anvil, and they carry the mark of that making in their substance. They are black iron, still bearing the slight patina of the forge. Some rivets are as long as your hand, some are longer. The length depends on the thickness of the wood they must penetrate, and the grip they must achieve on the other side. Inside the shed, there is a rhythm that has begun. It is a rhythm that will continue for days, for weeks perhaps, as plank after plank is fastened to the ribs with these rivets. The rhythm is the rhythm of the hammer, but it is not a single hammer strike. It is a sequence, a conversation, a dance between two smiths or workers, one on the outside of the hull and one on the inside. The worker on the inside of the hull is positioned in the tight space between the ribs and the developing hull. It is cramped work, uncomfortable work, work that requires a kind of flexibility and patience that can only come from years of doing it. He is holding something called a rover, or a washer, a small disc of iron, perhaps an inch and a half across, with a hole through the center that matches the diameter of the rivet shaft. The rover is placed over the hole, and the rivet is inserted through it, so that the rivet penetrates through the plank, through the rib, and extends slightly beyond the other side, where the rover catches it and holds it in place. The worker on the outside, the one you can see, the one whose work is more visible, is holding a hammer. Not a large hammer, not a sledgehammer, but a specialized tool with a head that is almost perfectly spherical. This is a riveting hammer, shaped and weighted to deliver consistent blows, to drive the rivet, and to form its end without splitting the wood around it. The outside worker positions the rivet in one of the drilled holes. He taps it gently at first, testing it, making sure it is seated correctly, making sure the hole is receiving it properly. The tap is a light sound, almost timid compared to what is coming. It is the sound of preparation, of centering, of gathering intention. And then the real work begins. The hammer strikes the rivet, not violently, but with purpose, with weight, with the full force of the worker's arm and body behind it. The sound is sharp and clear, a clink, a pure note of iron on iron, the head of the rivet striking the head of the hammer, or the hammer striking a tool called a set, which is positioned on top of the rivet to hold it straight while it is being formed. Inside the hull, the worker on the other side feels the impact through his hands. He feels the rivet wanting to move, wanting to shift, and he braces the rover against it, holding it steady, preventing it from moving through the wood. The rivet is being formed now. The heat of the repeated impacts is warming the iron, making it slightly more pliable, allowing it to be shaped. Clink, the hammer strikes again. The sound echoes in the shed, bouncing off the timber frame and the roof and the walls. It is a clear, ringing sound, almost musical in its purity. Each strike is separate and distinct, but they come in rapid succession, forming a rhythm. Clink, clink, clink. The rhythm is not quite steady. The worker is responding to the resistance of the rivet, to the way the iron is being formed, to the feedback he is getting through the hammer handle. But there is a pattern to it, a music to it, a kind of purposefulness that transforms the simple act of striking metal into something almost ritualistic. As the rivet is struck repeatedly, its end is slowly flattened. The protruding shaft, which was initially several inches long beyond the other side of the wood, gradually shortens as the hammer shapes it, as the iron is compressed and reformed under repeated impacts. Each strike removes height, but adds width. The end of the rivet is spreading out, forming a head on the inside of the ship that matches the head on the outside. The rhythm changes subtly as the work progresses. The early strikes, when the rivet is longest and there is more distance for the hammer to travel, have a certain quality. They are driving strikes, strikes that are meant to move the rivet, to form it, to begin the process of flattening. But as the rivet shortens, as the head forms, the nature of the work changes. The strikes become more refined, more about shaping, more about achieving a specific form. The rhythm becomes tighter, more insistent. Tap, 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 tap. The clink sound begins to shift into something different, sometimes a tap, sometimes a dull thud as the hammer drives the tool against iron, against iron, against wood. The sound is hypnotic. It fills the shed. It echoes and reverberates. If there are multiple teams working simultaneously, if there are rivet lines being formed along several planks at once, the shed becomes a symphony of clinks and taps and thuds, all slightly out of phase with each other, creating a complex rhythm that suggests order and chaos at the same time. It is the sound of a ship being built, the sound of wood and iron becoming one, the sound of the future being formed. The rivet is almost complete now. The end that was protruding from the inside of the hull has been nearly entirely formed into a head that mirrors the head on the outside. The two heads now grip the wood between them, holding it, compressing it, locking the plank to the rib. The hammer strikes are becoming gentler now, more finishing touches than driving force. The worker is ensuring that the head is smooth, that there are no sharp edges, that the rivet is properly seated. One final strike. It is gentle, almost reverent, a completion of the work that has been in progress for perhaps 2 or 3 minutes. And then the hammer is withdrawn. The rivet is complete. The plank and the rib are now permanently joined. The wood between the two iron heads is compressed, locked, incapable of moving relative to each other without the wood itself splitting. The worker inside the ship withdraws the rover. He runs his hand over the formed head of the rivet, checking its smoothness, checking that the iron head is properly seated against the wood, that there is no gap, that the fastening is secure. There is a satisfaction in this moment, the moment when the work is complete, when something that was separate is now joined, when the invisible becomes visible in the form of the solid iron head. And then the outside worker moves to the next hole. He positions the next rivet. He taps it gently, centering it, and the rhythm begins again. Clink, clink, clink. Tap, tap, tap. Thud. The sound fills the shed, fills the day, becomes the heartbeat of the work. Hour after hour, the rhythm continues. The planks are slowly fastened, line by line, rivet by rivet. Each plank might require 30 or 40 rivets, depending on its length. Each rivet is a small miracle of forming and fastening, each one a connection, each one a declaration that this ship will hold together, that these pieces will not separate, that the work matters and will endure. The workers who are driving the rivets develop a kind of trance, their minds empty of everything except the present moment. The hammer becomes an extension of their arm. The impact becomes something they feel in their entire body. Strike after strike, hour after hour, the muscles develop a memory for this work, a knowledge that goes deeper than conscious thought. The rhythm enters their bones. When they finally stop, when the day's work is done and they rest, they can still feel the rhythm, can still hear the ghost of the clink-clink tapping, can still feel the vibration of the impacts running through their arms. But the riveting is only the beginning of the fastening, because rivets alone, no matter how perfectly formed, will not make a hull waterproof. The gaps between the overlapping planks, the spaces where wood meets wood, the small imperfections in the joints, all of these must be sealed, must be made impervious to water. And this is where the caulking begins. The material used for caulking is simple but effective. It is animal hair, usually wool, sometimes hair from other creatures, and it is mixed with tar. The wool provides the bulk, the substance, the material that fills the gaps. The tar provides the seal, the waterproofing, the substance that hardens and becomes watertight, that resists rot and keeps the water out. A worker takes a handful of this mixture, wool and tar combined into something that is sticky and dark and has a texture somewhere between felt and clay. The smell of it is strong, pungent, a combination of the salty animal scent of the wool and the sharp, almost chemical smell of the tar. It is not a pleasant smell in the way that flowers are pleasant, but it is a compelling smell, a smell that speaks of function and purpose and ancient knowledge. The worker kneels at the overlap of two planks. He examines the gap between them. In the best cases, where the planks have been laid with perfect precision, the gap is minimal, just a hairline space. In other cases, where the wood has warped slightly or where the planks do not fit perfectly together, the gap is slightly wider. The worker understands this and adjusts his approach accordingly. He takes the caulking material and begins to wedge it into the gap. He uses a tool, a kind of chisel or wedge with a wooden handle, to drive the caulking down between the planks. As he drives it, the wool is compressed, the tar is worked deeper into the crack, and the gap is filled. The tool, with each strike, drives the caulking deeper and deeper until it is no longer possible to drive it further. The caulking is now locked between the planks, held in place by the pressure of the overlapping wood. The motion is rhythmic, methodical. Along each overlap, the worker moves from one end of the plank to the other, striking the caulking tool repeatedly, driving the caulking deeper, filling the gap completely. The hammer strikes against the caulking tool are different from the strikes on the riveting hammer. They are heavier, more forceful, more about compression than about shaping. The sound is a dull thud, the sound of force being absorbed by the wood and the caulking material, the sound of pressure and compression. As the caulking is driven deeper, the sticky tar begins to adhere to the tool and to the wood. The worker's hands become coated with it, dark, sticky, not easily removed. The tar sticks to his fingers and his palms and his clothing. It is a substance that claims everything it touches, that marks the workers with its presence, that becomes part of them by the end of the day. The scent of the caulking grows stronger as the work progresses. Confined in the space between the planks, heated slightly by the friction of the tool and the compression, the tar releases its smell more intensely. It is a smell that seems to originate from deep time, from ancient forests that have been turned to tar through heat and pressure and time beyond human reckoning. It is a smell that carries information to something deep in the brain, something that responds to it on a level beneath consciousness. The caulking on a single plank, for a plank that might be 30 or 40 feet long, can take hours. The worker moves along the entire length of the plank, striking, driving, compressing, until the entire overlap has been filled with caulking, until there is no gap anywhere that water could find its way through. The work is meditative and exhausting at the same time. It is simple work, repetitive work, work that requires no great technical skill, but does require patience and attention and physical endurance. And as he works, his mind drifts. He thinks about other ships he has built, other planks he has caulked. He thinks about the forests where the trees that became these planks once grew. He thinks about the tar, wondering where it comes from, how it was made, what ancient forest burned or was compressed to create it. He thinks about the ship, about the moment when it will finally be complete, about the sea it will sail, about the places it will go. When the caulking is finally complete, when the entire hull has been treated, when every plank has been joined to its ribs with rivets and sealed with caulking, the work is not yet done. Because the tar on the outside, worked between the planks, will not be enough. The entire hull must be sealed, must be coated, must be made into something that water cannot penetrate. And this is where the heating of the tar begins. In a corner of the boat shed, a fire pit burns steadily. Near it is positioned a large iron pot, and in this pot is pine tar. The tar has been heating slowly, gradually warming, becoming more fluid, becoming more workable. The process cannot be rushed. If the tar gets too hot, it will become too thin, will run off the wood without sealing properly. If it remains too cool, it will be thick and difficult to work with, will not penetrate into the grain of the wood, will not provide the seal that is needed. The smell of the heating tar fills the entire shed. It is the smell of the north, the smell of this place and this work. It is sharp and acrid, and somehow also comforting, a smell that speaks of protection and waterproofing and the transformation of wood into something that can withstand the sea. The smell grows stronger as the tar heats, as volatile compounds rise from the surface, as the substance becomes more active and alive. The tar bubbles slowly in the pot. The bubbles rise to the surface, swell, and then burst, releasing tiny wisps of smoke that carry the smell further into the shed. The sound is a gentle one, a soft, sizzling sound, the sound of heat transforming a solid or semi-solid substance into something more fluid. It is a sound that has been heard in boat sheds throughout the north for centuries, a sound that speaks of industry and craft and the slow work of transformation. When the tar has reached the proper temperature, a temperature that the worker determines by experience, by watching the way the bubbles form and move, by understanding the consistency of the substance, it is time to begin the coating. A worker takes a large brush, the bristles bound together with twine, and dips it into the pot. The brush emerges covered with hot tar, dripping with it, steaming slightly from the heat. The smell intensifies dramatically. The worker approaches the hull. He has already brushed tar onto many sections, so this is not new work but continuation, but the knowledge of what is happening does not diminish the moment. He begins to brush the tar onto the wood. The pale oak, which has been exposed and raw through much of the building process, is transformed immediately. Where the brush touches, the oak darkens, becomes slick and shiny, becomes sealed. The tar soaks into the grain of the wood. This is the crucial part. The tar does not simply sit on the surface but penetrates, is absorbed, becomes part of the wood, fills the tiny spaces in the grain, the imperfections, the places where water might otherwise find a way in. The wood that was light and pale becomes dark and rich and alive-looking. It becomes something that seems to glow in the firelight, something that seems to contain depth. The brush moves along the hull, painting, coating, sealing. The pattern of the brushwork is visible after the tar begins to cool slightly. The strokes of the brush create lines and overlaps, creating a visual record of the painting process. The worker moves methodically, ensuring that every surface of the hull is covered, that no wood is left exposed, that the entire exterior is sealed and protected. The smell of the tar grows almost overwhelming as more and more of the hull is coated. It fills the air, fills the lungs, becomes the dominant reality of the shed. It is a smell that seems to have weight and substance, that seems to be almost visible, that seems to create a kind of atmosphere around the ship. Some of the workers find the smell unpleasant, almost choking. Others find it comforting, find it speaks to them of accomplishment, of the ship being transformed into something real and complete. As the tar cools, it thickens, becomes darker, becomes more permanent. The surfaces that were coated early in the day are now hardening, becoming set, becoming part of the ship. A second coat will be applied in the coming days, perhaps a third coat, ensuring that the seal is absolute, ensuring that the tar has penetrated everywhere, ensuring that the ship will be waterproof. And all the while, as the hull is being sealed with tar, another worker is engaged in work that is more artistic, more expressive, more concerned with the future than with the practical present. At the prow of the ship, the carver has taken up his chisels and his hammers and the fine tools that are used for detailed work, and he is beginning to shape the dragon. The dragon head will be the face of the ship. It will be the first thing that cuts the water, the first thing that strikes the eye of anyone who sees the ship approaching. It is not simply decorative, though it is beautiful, but it is also a declaration of purpose, a statement of identity, a kind of prayer or blessing sent forward to the sea. The carver has taken a block of wood, oak again, selected for its quality and straightness, and has roughly shaped it to suggest the head of a dragon or a serpent. It is crude at this stage, blocky, more geometric than organic. But in the mind of the carver, the finished form is already visible, is already present, is already singing to be released from the wood. The carver takes his finest chisel, a narrow blade, sharp and carefully maintained. He positions it against the wood and strikes it gently with a small hammer. A chip of wood, no larger than a fingernail, falls away. The shape beneath emerges, grain by grain, curve by curve. The carver examines the work and repositions his chisel. Another chip, another revelation of the form beneath. The work of carving is meditative in a different way than the riveting or the caulking. The riveting is about rhythm and repetition, about establishing a beat that can be sustained. The carving is about presence and attention, about being completely focused on the moment, about listening to the wood and understanding what it is revealing. The eye of the dragon is taking shape now. The carver has created a depression, a hollow, a space where the eye will be. But the eye itself, the focus point, the thing that will seem to stare out at the world, that is still to come. He will carve deep into the wood, creating a kind of pupil, a focal point. The wood chips fall away, catching the light. The smell of the wood, released by the chiseling, rises into the air. The teeth are next. The carver creates a series of raised points, teeth that seem to jut from the jaw of the dragon. They are not uniform. Some are larger, some smaller, some jut at different angles. This irregularity is what makes them seem alive, what makes the dragon seem dangerous, seems ready to bite, seems ready to consume. The carver works with total focus, and his breathing becomes shallow, becomes almost a meditation on precision. The scales are perhaps the most tedious work. The carver creates a pattern of small raised edges, each one catching light, each one suggesting a layer of armor, of protection, of the hardness of the dragon. The pattern runs across the surface of the head, following the contours of the form, creating movement and life in the wood. Hours pass. The carver does not notice. The shed exists around him as a distant awareness. The fire, the smell of tar, the sound of the other workers, all of these are background, are distant, are not important. What is important is the wood and the chisel and the form that is emerging, that is being revealed, that is becoming real. And gradually, imperceptibly, the transformation occurs. The crude block of wood becomes a head. The geometric shape becomes an organic form. The dragon begins to look out at the world. Its expression, which has emerged from the wood almost despite the carver's intention, is watchful, is intelligent, is knowing. It will be the guardian of the ship, the thing that leads it, the thing that speaks to the sea on behalf of the vessel and the men who will sail it. While the carver works on the dragon, other workers are engaged in their own forms of transformation. The oars are being shaped. Ash wood has been selected for this purpose. Ash is lighter than oak but still strong, has a flexibility that is useful for oars, has a grain that is fine and straight. Long poles of ash, perhaps 20 feet long, have been brought into the shed. An oar is not simply a pole. It must have a specific shape to be effective. The shaft, the long part that will be gripped and manipulated, must be round and smooth. The blade, the end that will push against the water, must be flat and slightly widened, designed to catch the water and move the ship forward. The transition between the shaft and the blade must be smooth and strong, positioned exactly right, so that the oar balances properly in the hand. The shaping of the oar is done on a shave horse, a kind of bench with an angled top and a clever mechanism for holding the wood while the worker shapes it. The wood is positioned in the shave horse, held in place by foot pressure on a lever, and the worker stands beside it with a drawknife in hand. The drawknife is an elegant tool. It has a long blade, perhaps a foot and a half wide, with handles at both ends that angle away from the blade. The blade is incredibly sharp, maintained on a leather strap until it can shave hair from the arm. The tool is used in a pulling motion. The worker pulls it toward him, and the blade bites into the wood, removing a long, thin shaving. The shaving curls away from the wood in a long ribbon, peeling back the excess material, revealing the form beneath. The sound of the drawknife at work is a soft scritch-scratch, a whisper of blade against wood. But it is a sound that carries information. The worker can hear whether the blade is cutting cleanly or is beginning to dull, can hear whether the wood is responding properly or is resisting, can hear the quality of the work happening in real time. The worker pulls the drawknife along the shaft of the oar. A long ribbon of ash wood curls back and falls away. The worker repositions the oar slightly in the shave horse and pulls again. Scritch-scratch. Another ribbon, another revelation of the form beneath. The shaft gradually becomes rounder, becomes smoother, becomes more refined. The work is not rushed. The form of the oar is determined not by measurement, but by feel, by eye, by understanding how the oar should balance, how it should hang in the water, how it should feel in the hand of the rower. The worker has made many oars, has held many oars in his hands, has felt their balance, and this knowledge is conveyed through the tool, through the knife, through the subtle adjustments he makes as he works. The blade of the oar is shaped differently. Here the drawknife is used more carefully, removing thinner shavings, creating a flat surface that is smooth and true. The edges are rounded slightly so that they will not dig into the water, so that they will push smoothly, so that the rower will not split his hands on sharp wood. The balance point, the place where the oar can be held and will balance perfectly, is achieved through subtle adjustments, through removing material here and there until the oar feels right. And then there comes a moment when the carving is complete. The oar is done. The worker removes it from the shave horse and holds it up to the light. The ash wood is pale, almost white, and it glows in the firelight. The form is perfect, is balanced, is beautiful in the way that functional things are beautiful. The oar is ready. It will be seasoned slightly, will be stored, but it is essentially complete. And then another log of ash is positioned in the shave horse, and the work begins again. But even as the oars are being shaped, and the dragon is being carved, and the hull is being tarred and sealed, the weather outside is shifting. The blizzard that has been a constant presence, that has been howling against the shed for days, begins to intensify. The wind grows stronger. The snow falls harder. The shed groans. The massive timber beams that form the frame of the building creak and shift slightly as the wind exerts tremendous pressure against them. The roof, already bent under the weight of accumulated snow, bears down further as fresh snow continues to fall. The sound is alarming at first, a kind of cracking, a kind of complaint from the wood. But the workers have heard this sound before. The shed was built to withstand just this kind of weather. The massive beams are designed to flex, to move, to accommodate the forces being applied to them. A worker goes to one of the wall openings and peers out into the maelstrom. The world outside has become a blank white thing, a place of wind and snow and cold that seems almost unreal, almost like a different world entirely. The fjord is invisible beneath the snow. The mountains are invisible. There is nothing but the white and the howling and the sense of a terrible power being unleashed. He closes the opening and returns to the fire. The shed remains secure. The ship remains safe within it, and the contrast between the terrible power of the storm outside and the warmth and safety of the interior becomes almost overwhelming. The firelight seems warmer in comparison to the knowledge of the cold beyond. The smell of the tar seems more comforting, more protective. The presence of the ship, nearly complete, nearly ready, seems like a promise of safety, of survival, of the human ability to create shelter and security in the face of natural forces that seem determined to destroy such things. The workers continue their labors, but there is a different quality to the work now. There is an urgency, an awareness that this ship, this work, this creation, is something that matters, something that stands between the men and the unforgiving sea and sky beyond. The ship being built in this shed is not simply a vessel. It is a testimony, a statement, a declaration that humans can create things of beauty and function in the face of a natural world that cares nothing for such creations. But even as the storm rages, there is something stirring in the minds of the workers. Beneath the immediate awareness of the weather, beneath the focus on the tasks at hand, there is a knowledge, a sense of future, a feeling that this moment of creation is temporary, is a prelude to something else. The ice on the fjord is beginning to weaken. It is still thick, still solid, but there is something in the air that speaks of spring, of the change of seasons, of the moment when the frozen world will become liquid again. And when that moment comes, when the ice finally breaks and the water of the fjord is open and deep and moving again, the ship will be ready. The workers imagine it, even as they work. They imagine the moment when the ship, which has been supported on blocks of wood inside the shed, is finally released. The blocks are removed. The ship is no longer resting on them, but is instead suspended on a kind of track, on the wooden supports that have guided its construction. And then, with ropes and pulleys and the strength of many men, the ship is moved. It is dragged from the shed, out into the pale spring light, onto the rocky shore of the fjord. The moment of the launch is imagined. The ship is positioned. The men line up along its sides, holding ropes, and at a signal they begin to pull, begin to drag the great wooden structure toward the water. The hull that has been built in the darkness of the shed experiences daylight for the first time. The dragon head sees the open sky. The oars, stored and ready, wait to be deployed. And then, with a final heave, the ship meets the water. The hull, which has been supported by the earth and the rocks, suddenly feels different. The water receives it, supports it, embraces it. The ship, which has been stationary, suddenly feels like it might move, might have autonomy, might become alive in a new way. But that moment is still weeks away. That moment is still in the future, hidden beyond the spring thaw, hidden behind the work that remains to be done. For now, the ship sleeps on its blocks, in the darkness of the shed, protected from the storm, being slowly completed. The fire in the pit begins to burn lower. The day's work is coming to an end. The workers are becoming tired, are becoming hungry, are becoming ready for rest. The smell of the tar, which has been overwhelming for hours, is becoming a kind of normal, a baseline against which the workers no longer consciously register. You find yourself moving toward the center of the shed, toward the ship. The dragon head stares out toward the wall, toward the direction of the fjord, though the fjord is invisible beyond the storm. The hull, which is mostly complete now, rises above you like a shelter, like a protective presence. The rivet heads, which you can see on the inside of the hull in the firelight, catch the light and shine with a kind of metallic dignity. Near the hull, near the bow, there is a pile of furs. They are the furs of various animals, seals, bears, perhaps reindeer, and they have been arranged as a kind of bed, a place where someone can rest. The workers sometimes sleep here rather than returning to their homes on the other side of the fjord. The cold and the distance make the journey difficult in winter, and there is often more work to be done than can be completed in a single day. You lie down on the furs. They are warm, surprisingly warm, and they carry the smell of the animals they came from, a smell that mingles with the smell of the tar and the wood and the fire. You pull another fur over yourself as a kind of blanket. The weight of it is comforting, is protective, is like being held. Above you, the ship looms. The dragonhead is visible in the firelight, watching, guarding, keeping watch over this sleeping figure and this workspace. The shape of the hull, the curve of the ribs, the arrangement of the planks, all of these are visible and clear, and they all seem to suggest protection, seem to suggest the future, seem to suggest that this ship will indeed float and sail and carry men across the sea. The fire burns lower still. The flames shrink, become more orange and less yellow, become more a bed of embers than an active flame. The light in the shed becomes dimmer, becomes more intimate, becomes more like the light of sleep. The shadows grow longer, grow deeper, seem to fill more of the space. You feel yourself drifting. The events of the day, the riveting, the caulking, the tar, the carving, the shaping of the oars, all of these blend together in your mind into a kind of dream, a kind of slow-motion sequence that seems both immediate and very distant. You are aware of the smell of the tar, now heavy and comforting, now like a blanket made of scent, like something that is protecting you, that is keeping you safe. The storm continues outside, but it seems very distant. The wind still howls, but it is a distant sound, is something that is happening in another world, another reality. Inside the shed there is stillness, there is warmth, there is the sense of work completed and rest earned. The dragon watches. In the dying firelight, its expression seems almost tender, almost protective. It has been carved to look fierce and ready for battle. But in this moment, in this light, it seems like it is watching over you, seems like it is keeping guard while you sleep, seems like it understands that what happens in this shed, what is being created here, what will soon float on the sea, is something worth protecting. The embers in the fire pit continue to glow. They pulse with a kind of slow rhythm, as if the fire itself is breathing, is living, is present even in its diminishment. The warmth from them radiates outward, radiates toward you, radiates toward the ship, seems to fill the entire shed with a kind of gentle heat. And as you drift deeper into sleep, as the boundary between waking and dreaming becomes less distinct, as the images from the day continue to move through your mind like a river flowing, you are aware of one thing above all else. You are safe. The ship surrounds you. The shed surrounds you. The work is being done. The dragon watches. And in the spring, when the ice melts, this ship will be ready. It will float. It will sail. And the men who have built it, who have poured their knowledge and their skill and their understanding into its creation, will trust it with their lives. And it will not fail them. It will carry them across the sea. It will bring them to distant shores. It will be their shelter, their home, their dragon riding the waves. But for now, for this moment, there is only sleep and warmth and the knowing presence of the ship and the patient, slow burning of the fire as it turns to ash and memory. And as the snow covers the roof and the fire turns to embers, the great ship waits in the dark, ready for the spring tides. The work is done and you are safe. Sleep well.